Well, the face-off between Donald Trump administration and Harvard University is intensifying. After the Trump administration revoked Harvard University's ability to enroll international students, Harvard has now sued the Trump administration. The university has sued the administration. It's challenging the freezing of over $2.2 billion in federal research funding, which the university claims is unconstitutional and violates federal laws, including the First Amendment and the Administrative Procedure Act. In fact, in its escalating battle with the Ivy League school, the Trump administration has said that thousands of current students must transfer to other schools or leave the country. And the administration has also added that it would be doing so as an ongoing investigation into the university by the Department of Homeland Security. In fact, according to university estimates, more than 6,000 international students were enrolled at Harvard during the year 2024-2025. That's the academic year I'm talking about. The Trump administration, remember, for weeks has been locked in a fierce battle with Harvard University and other higher educational institutions over claims that they tolerate anti-Semitism on their campuses. In fact, he's threatened their budgets, tax exemption status, and enrollment of foreign students. Now, with this latest directive, what happens to those students? What's behind Donald Trump's crackdown on universities in the United States? Well, we decode all of those questions and a lot more about this big developing story with Alastair Newton. He's the CEO of Alavant Business Advisory. Thank you very much, Mr. Newton, for joining us here on ET Now. Last week it was about taxing remittances. Now Donald Trump has decided to not allow international students to study at Harvard, and this is pretty knee-jerk. This, of course, is to appeal to his MAGA base. But how is he, with these policies, making America great again? What do you make of the allegations that, in fact, have been hurled by Homeland Security Department?
Well, first of all, I don't think Donald Trump is doing anything through this policy to make America great again. Quite the contrary. This is a tremendous act of self-harm by the US government. The US universities and research institutes, particularly the Ivy League, have a well-deserved global reputation for extremely high standards of research, the sort of research which made America the great power it was in the 20th century. And without that research, it is going to be a diminishing power in the 21st century. It's basically handing over the lead role in research, not just domestically, but internationally, to principally China, ironically, given American-China rivalry. Now, of course, other countries are going to benefit as well. And I'm sure that some of the top schools in India, and you do have some very fine schools in India, are going to benefit if Donald Trump continues this vendetta against Harvard, which, to its credit, is standing up to administration bullying. We all know what happens if you don't stand up to administration bullying. We saw it in the case of law firms who caved in the face of Trump pressure and have since been asked to do more and more and more. Standing up is not without its pain, but it's probably the better option for Harvard to take than capitulating.
Right, sir. But, Harvard, of course, we'll elaborate on that a little bit. Harvard has now sued the U.S. administration. Where do you think, not being a legal expert, but where do you think things stand currently between the United States administration and Harvard? And what more action do you anticipate Harvard to take in this regard?
Well, first of all, they're clearly going to go for a restraint order as well as suing the government. They will want to protect the enrollment of the, I think, 6,800 foreign students, to be precise, out of 25,000, so over a quarter of the total student population. They want to protect them as best they can. I would reckon that they will get a restraint order. They will have thought this through very carefully. Judging by the speed at which they issued their action against the government, they obviously were prepared for this sort of eventuality. So I think those students' positions is safe for the time being, but clearly the administration will look to escalate still further. Now, Harvard is not without its problems. Let's be clear. There's been a lot of criticism, including from one of its own professors, Steven Pinker, a professor of psychology there, who has written in the New York Times about some of the actions which he's taken internally over admissions and wokeness and so on and so forth. And there is, I think, a degree of legitimate concern about the way in which woke has been a bit of a damper on free speech within Harvard and indeed on research. But the action that the administration is taken is way, way over the top. And it's actually not addressing the specific problems. It's just taking a broad brush approach against the university as a whole, which frankly smacks of vindictiveness and of a reverse political correctness gone mad.
You know, what do you make of the legal violations that have been committed by Harvard here? You know, in fact, the Homeland Security has issued a release as well. They say that it's a privilege to employ aliens. That's what they call all the international students who are studying at Harvard, aliens on campus. He says that as a result of your refusal to comply with multiple requests to provide the Department of Homeland Security, this is essentially why they are coming up with such a directive. So what happens, you know, to the liberal democracy that the United States claims that it is?
Well, that's a huge question, with all due respect, Sumita. And we could get into the whole thing about threats to the US Constitution and so on and so forth. I mean, clearly, this is an action which is within the realms of the power which the US administration has. But is it in America's best interest, be it as a liberal democracy or otherwise? Answer no. The largest group of overseas students at Harvard today are actually Chinese nationals who do not come from a liberal democracy after all. But let's consider the soft power implications of this. Very sadly, in many respects, the greatest expert on soft power, Joseph Nye, died a few weeks ago, as you're no doubt aware. If Joseph was still alive today, he would be very, very saddened indeed to see the way in which the Trump administration, as a supposed liberal democracy — the US is still a liberal democracy despite some of the things we've seen going on there, is basically killing its soft power strength, which has been one of its strongest assets during the course of the last century or so, not just through its attacks on universities and foreign students, of course, but also through issues like the slashing of USAID. I don't think Donald Trump did America any favors at all in the eyes of a lot of the global South earlier this week with his attack on Cyril Ramaphosa. You know, this is just another manifestation of the same sort of philosophy which we're seeing from the Trump administration. This happens to be a particularly egregious one, in my view, because of the damage it is going to do to America's research and the damage it is going to do with America's ability to show its best side to all the overseas students who are studying there.
Right, sir. But what happens to the 30% of students, according to, several estimates reportedly that have been coming out, to the students who are actually already studying at Harvard? And how does that work practically, let's say, for students from India, which form the second highest number of students studying at Harvard, close to about 800 of them studying. And of course, China has the highest number, which is slightly over 2,000.
Well, I think, first of all, as I said earlier, there'll be a restraint order to keep those students in place for the time being until this issue works its way through the courts, which is likely to take a very long time. So it's quite likely that students who are there today will have an opportunity to complete their degree course. The question is, what is going to happen to the Indian students or indeed the overseas students in general who have applied to go to Harvard for the next academic year? And clearly they are going to be thinking very, very carefully indeed about whether they want to go to Harvard to start a course or whether they're going to go to a university somewhere else. European universities will be working very hard to try to attract Indian students, Chinese students too, for that matter. And I do think that you're going to see quite a lot of potential future Indian undergraduates in the US looking elsewhere, including, of course, to India's top colleges, which, as I said earlier, are of a very high standard indeed. But clearly, Harvard, Ivy League, it does have a special ring to it. It does help in career opportunities and so on and so forth. But, you know, the world is going to adjust if Donald Trump is successful in his objectives here.
Right, sir, but the administration says that Harvard is coordinating with the Chinese Communist Party. It's fostering violence, anti-Semitism. But the big question here now is that what does the US electorate really think about this? You know, are they buying these claims that Trump administration is making with respect to, appeasing to his MAGA base?
I'm sure that, Harvard in particular, the Ivy League in general, has come under quite a lot of criticism in the US from not just the MAGA base, but others as well over many years. Now, as I said earlier, it has its problems. The Ivy League colleges do have their faults. But, you know, free speech is an important right in democracies, as India itself well knows. And there is, of course, a fine line between violent protest, between hate speech on the one hand, and free speech on the other. And that line tends to vary from time to time in any society as the pendulum swings backwards and forwards. But, you know, it's not just students at Harvard who have been protesting over Israeli actions in Gaza. It's not just anti-Palestinian sentiment, which we're seeing in some American colleges either. This is widespread. The war in Gaza is a great tragedy. Views are becoming increasingly polarized on it worldwide. Obviously, there was the tragedy of the 2 Israeli diplomats shot in Washington this week, which is very, very sad indeed. And my saddest sentiments over that. But, people have a right to protest in the US. And the administration can't just say there is no right to protest on specific issues because that's not consistent with our policy. That goes against the US Constitution.
All right, sir. Well, on that note, thank you very much. And thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on this big move that Donald Trump has made on Harvard University. His administration, rather, has made that decision with respect to Harvard. Of course, that tiff is intensifying as Harvard has also retaliated. We'll have to see if it really stands the legal test and what really happens to university students from abroad who are studying in the university. I do believe that story will unfold in the days to come. Thank you very much on that note for joining us on India Tonight.
Pleasure, Sumita.